just to give you a flavor of some of the stuff that he does here, and he's a Republican, so I have to say that. And his wife this year is going to be Maryland chair of the Trump re-election campaign.
She is the Howard County chair, and she's a delegate to the national.
She is the delegate to the national convention.
She ran the only fundraiser in 2016 to Donald Trump.
Yeah. So she's up and coming, and an amazing woman, as are his two other children as well. Some of the things that Mark has been working on in the last couple of years, he sponsors bills on criminal law, public safety. There's a couple of interesting things I found, life-threatening injuries, human trafficking, something on indecent exposure, which I'll have to talk to you about. Labor and employment, solar recycling. Mark, in his own right, is a very successful business owner. He owns a cell tower infrastructure company in his spare time, which doesn't seem like it's very much anymore. And also, since December 28th of 2018, Mark has been hosting a very successful podcast, which I would recommend to you all. It's called Mark and the Millennials. And I think there's a couple of the millennials here in the room. The first episode of his podcast was titled Safe Spaces, French Riots, and Gas Taxes. And then the last one, which was just last Friday, is entitled A Party About Nothing. So there's lots of laughter, there's a lot of meat about local and federal politics. And the nice thing about it is it's a really good voice for young people. So you get a chance to hear what young conservatives have to say about what's going on in our country and in Maryland today. It's really fascinating, highly recommended. Again, I adore Mark, so I'm like a bad person when I introduce him because I can't really think of anything that would be bipartisan in nature to say about him. But the reason that I am so heavily involved in this too was at one point I saw him at some fundraiser or something, and I said, Mark, I'm thinking about doing this convention of states thing, and I want to know what you think about it. And then for like the next 20 minutes, he was telling me everything he knew about the Constitution, and about all the books that he'd read on this topic, and on and on and on. I was so blown away. I felt completely intimidated by his knowledge on the subject. He knows more about it, I think, than anybody in Annapolis, besides the experts that are doing something about that. So he is really a true champion for this cause. I think he can answer any question you might have on the Constitution and the government here. So with that said, I would like you to give a very hearty welcome to Mark Fisher.
That was even better than I wrote it. Thank you. So I want to introduce Kathy Shalika. She's our House Minority Whip. Kathy, what C didn't tell you is during the election in 2018, when I was running for re-election in Howard County, one of the most embarrassing things you can do as a candidate, it's very, this is when you really leave your ego at home, is you sign wave. You get on the road and you sign wave, right? And that really runs up your name ID because you hold your sign, and it's as silly as it may sound, there's no cheaper and easier way to get people to know who you are than to do just that. So I would sit on the road literally 5 months, sign wave, every morning starting at somewhere in the 6 a.m. range, and then some days I would do it for 3 hours. Try doing this for 3 hours and looking like enthused, right? And cars would come by, and you would know what people thought because they'd either beat their horns and say, like this, or they would, go like this. And then, but I didn't really, it didn't really work great until C one day stopped. She parked her car on the side of the highway, Route 4, which is a highway, and she said, I'm going to help you. So bring a sign tomorrow. So the next day I brought a sign, and I gave her the sign, and she's out there, and she always dresses very, modern and great, and we'll leave it at that. And so she's out there, and everybody was beeping their horn because he was out there. So it wasn't.
Which just made me want to do it more.
So I have to say, C, thank you very much for getting me elected in 2018. Re-elected in 2018.
The scary thing was that it was getting like earlier and earlier, and so it was dark. would go by. It's crazy. It's scary.
So I'm honored to be here today to just speak briefly with you guys. Happy to take questions after I speak. I'm not going to speak very long because I'm sure there are plenty of other people who like to say things as well. Self-employed, as C said, lifelong self-employed guy. Got into the telecommunications business early when only 5% of the population had cell phones. No one thought it was a good idea. I couldn't get any loans to build, own, and operate cell phone towers. All the banks thought I was stupid. And then one day, of course, everybody wanted a cell phone. And so fast forward when Barack Obama was elected, and I felt financially secure. I should add to that, I started with nothing. You know, I didn't inherit any money. I started with nothing, grew up poor in Baltimore. And fast forward, when Barack Obama got elected, I was inspired to run. And this had never happened before in my life, when he said the classic Marxist statement, "You didn't build that, someone else made that happen." And when I heard that on TV, and I realized that my entire education at George Washington University, which was about international affairs and economics, and we would take courses, because back then GW had what was called the Sino-Soviet Institute, which basically studied the Marxist philosophy and the divide between China and the Soviet Union. And so I took all these courses by all these State Department folks, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I had to actually read those Marxist manuscripts. I had to read State and Revolution, the Communist Manifesto. I had to actually read the actual manuscript. It was part of the curriculum. And Barack Obama literally just said, the President of the United States said a classic Marxist statement that you are not responsible for what you do. You're not responsible, according to him. That everybody else is responsible, the collective is responsible. And that's when I realized that I had this calling, and that's when I went to my wife. And believe me, when you run, it's your wife who's running when you're running, even though she may not want, vice versa. I know Kathy would agree with that, because Kathy's husband, Mark, is wonderful. And you have to go to your spouse and convince them why this is important, because you're giving up all your privacy, and you're putting yourself out there, especially in a state like this. And I had this double whammy, because I was in the district, and still am, of the longest serving Senate president in American history, Senator Mike Miller. And he had never had a Republican in this district, ever. And they worked like you know what to make sure that that didn't happen, and yet I still won. And I'm convinced it was because of help like people like C and others who also heard and I want to make this clear, I don't want to hit on Barack Obama 100% here, but when he said that, it was really frightening to me. And that, to me, was the genesis of the modern socialist movement in America, when he said that. Because now, what do we have? We have millennials. There were 2 millennials here that work in my office. We have millennials that actually believe, the majority of them at least, that socialism would be preferable to capitalism, or socialism would be preferable to the free market. And the free market is imperfect. It was supposed to be imperfect because people are imperfect. But the fact of the matter is that we spent the entire 20th century fighting communism. We were fighting it in an ideological way. And sometimes there were proxy wars, and we could argue about whether that was smart or not smart. But we were certainly fighting it ideologically worldwide, and its expansion. And then finally, we defeated it. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. And after defeating it, I never thought in my lifetime that in the 21st century, we would be fighting it at home instead of abroad. But that's exactly where we are. And I see there's a rabbi here, and interestingly enough, a lot of the totalitarianism and evil that occurred in Europe, and also the Soviet Union and elsewhere, in spite of what the left tries to tell you, actually Adolf Hitler came to power from the left initially because he promised redistribution. And speaking of which, today's the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which is incredible, right? And so we're thinking about this anniversary, and here we are, we're having this conversation about our federal government, which is totally and utterly out of control in its spending habits. Clearly, that's the case. And I want to gain some creds with you guys, right? So I don't have a vote at the federal level because I'm not elected at the federal level. But I have a vote here. And in spite of the budget that we have every year in Maryland, which is always bloated and completely out of control and always based on more economic growth and more spending and more taxes and so forth, despite all that, I have never voted for our state budget because it's so out of control. I refuse to do it. And so I get crap at home all the time. So I get stuff at all, get stuff from home. Sometimes you get opponents and they'll say, "Oh, well, you didn't vote for the state budget. That's why you didn't get stuff back home. That's why you're not bringing back the money." And here's my thing. I don't want to send the money to Annapolis in the first place, just like I don't want to send the money to the federal government in the first place. That's the problem I have with it. Right? At the federal level, guys, we have the administrative state overreach. So I brought this article, and y'all heard, President Trump talk about this. But here's proof that both parties are to blame, because they are. So in 2007, and I even pulled this from multiple sources. That's just the way I am, because I want to hear it from all that. So New York Times, CNBC, I want to listen to all of them, see what they say. But they all said the same thing. In 2007, the George W. Bush administration passed a law and advocated for the law to basically give the Department of the EPA and others the administrative ability to write rules governing your light bulbs in your house. And that law wouldn't go into effect until January 1st, 2020, this year. So that law was passed in 2007 by a Republican president and gave all this authority of your household, the inside of your household, to an agency. And then the agency then had all these years since 2007 to write administrative rules about what kind of light bulb you can use in your house. And so the President of the United States came out, and you may or may not have seen his speech recently at one of the rallies, where he says, by executive order, since the administrative state wrote the rules, the executive, which is the President of the United States, can then reverse those rules, or suspend them, or ignore them, by executive order, which is what he did. So now, of course, instead of choosing only one kind of light bulb or two kinds of light bulbs, you can choose whatever light bulb you want. Well, gee, thanks a lot, federal government. You've actually they let me choose my light bulbs. Wow, isn't that incredible? And the stupid, the halogen ones? It's got all this toxic warnings on the packages that he talked about, of course, and we've all had these things before. And of course, you put them in your trash can, and God forbid if you break it, because if you do, naturally the powder comes out and the gases come out, and it's toxic. This is an example, it's a very simple example of the power of the administrative state, and we are literally giving that away, and that is a Republican that did that. And I'm purposely not giving you a Democrat to show you that I have problems with both parties, obviously. I have to choose a party to run in, because unfortunately that's the way things are. We have a two-party system, and sometimes it's the lesser of two evils. I know that, believe me. There are plenty of people, some that would choose this president, others wouldn't. There are a lot of different beliefs and all that stuff. I felt like he was the great disruptor, which is why we got on board initially. A few years ago when he ran, I knew he was going to be a disruptor because he doesn't have to make money in government. He made his fortune before he came to government. Whereas so many other people come to government, like Barack Obama and the Clintons, and then they leave and they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. How's that happen? How's that happen? So, term limits. That's the next thing. So we do need term limits. But I want to bring this up to you guys. This is important. We've given so much power to all the administrative agencies at the federal level, but also at the state level, that you need elected officials who understand how to infight in those agencies to be able to help you, right? How many people here have called your delegate or your senator or your state senator or your United States congressman or United States senator because you needed help with an issue that you probably should never need help with? Anybody? Anybody? Happens all the time in our office. Everything from to Garrett, they'll say, hey, look, I'm having problems with MDE. MDE came over my house, and they told me I had to do this or that, and so we have to literally call the agency to advocate for the constituent, because the administrative state is cracking down on this individual. When O'Malley was in office, you guys will love this. I'm in Calvert County in Prince Frederick, on the Patuxent River, right? It's a beautiful river. I feel so blessed that I have that. But the O'Malley administration sent people out to all the riverfront properties, and they came on my property. The MDE, Maryland Department of the Environment, they came on my property without knocking on the door, went down to the pier and started measuring the pier, how long it was, how wide it was, whether I had steps, whether I had added anything to it, if there was a lift on the pier. So then the lady came to my front door afterwards, and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I was just down at your pier." And of course, I read her the Riot Act, and I was fortunate because at that time I was just barely in office because it was O'Malley's second term. And I said, "You know, do you realize that you're on private property and you never knocked and got permission? And what are you measuring my pier for?" She said, "Well, we found that it's 2 inches too long." And it's a true story. 2 inches too long. I said, "So what is the remedial action you want me to take?" "Well, first we're going to write you up, and if it's a violation and there's a big fine and all that stuff." I said, "You know what this is about? This is about collecting money and shaking people down." And because obviously O'Malley needs as much money as he can get because the economy was really turning down. And there was not enough money coming into Annapolis to sustain all the programs that they had already promised for so many people for so many years. So they were knocking, and they were knocking on people's doors and trying to find ways of shaking me down. And I said, "Well, you know, I just want you to know something. I don't have no trespassing signs along my driveway, but I'm going to get them." And so I called, you know, a good friend of mine, his attorney. He goes, "Mark, why don't you just put a trespassing sign?" He said, "If you want to be safe, put 2 up. And they cannot come on your property. They would actually have to send you a letter first to just notify you that they want to, and even then you can deny it." And so that's what we did, and basically said to her, "Look, you know, I can't believe you guys are doing this. I'm a member of the House of Delegates." And then she went, I said, "Well, that shouldn't matter. That shouldn't matter, right?" That's the problem with our system. That's another example of what's wrong, is that unless you're connected, you aren't treated the right way. Because the administrative state has that much power. And so I really just honor what you guys are doing. I just think it's fantastic. And I have to say, the team here has done a great job because this team has turned this into a major movement in the state. And I want to give you some examples of what you need to do. You need to knock on every single door of every single state senator and every single delegate. You need to knock on the Speaker of the House's door. Her offices, believe it or not, are in the Capitol. So is the Senate President's office. Knock on their doors and ask them to sponsor this legislation. Tell them that we want this bill to be in the HGO committee, which is Health and Government Operations, not in the Rules Committee. Because they put bills that they want to die in the Rules Committee. And talk to them about your issues. And as tempting as it may be to bring up your partisan feelings about things, instead, because it's hard for me too, instead, talk about the issues that are at the 100,000 foot level, which is how are we going to pay off $23 trillion? Why is it that Steny Hoyer has been in office for 40 plus years? And he's still the minority, whip in the House of Representatives. He's 81 years old, I think. Ridiculous.
I've been getting Christmas cards from him since I was like 11.
Exactly. Yes. And talk to them about the administrative state. And so in Maryland, we actually have, you guys will love this. This is how it works in DC too, the administrative state. Here, every single department, name a department here. The Department of Labor in Maryland has a handful, like 5 people, that they hire during this 90-day session in Annapolis that do nothing but lobby for the Department of Labor. Because they either don't like bills that we're putting in, or they're trying to accumulate more power, so they want you to put bills in. And so they lobby all the members to try to get them to kill stuff they don't like and pass stuff they do. That's how the administrative state gets bigger and more powerful. So we're even doing it here at the state level. And so I need you guys to go to every single office and talk to them. If they're not there, say, okay, can I make an appointment to talk to them at some later time today? Can I come back and make an appointment to talk to them wherever, at their home office, if it's in your county? You will get results, because people in elected office respond to numbers, right? They respond to numbers. That is to say, the more people you have show up, that you're going to your delegate or your state senator, the more likely they're going to respond to you. The more emails they get in their inbox, the more likely they're going to respond to you. And the more afraid they are going to get. The more afraid they're going to get. And so those are just kind of the nuts and bolts of what you have to do. This is Delegate Wayne Norman, everybody. Norman? Yeah. And that's what you have to do. So I just have to tell you guys, I didn't have to be in office, right? I'm not one of these guys that made money after I got in office. I made money before I came here. I didn't start with money. I started with nothing. Okay? I grew up in Baltimore. My backyard was a junkyard. Literally, it was the largest junkyard in the state. That was my backyard. And we had this tiny little lot, and there were 4 of us. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. My parents were married at 17 and 18. My mother had me. I was child number 3, and she was 23. So, and then my sister came 5 years later. I guess they decided to try for a girl after having 3 boys. So nothing came easy. And when I see how easy it is for government to spend all this money, I know how out of control things are. And I honor you guys for trying to bring the power back to the people and bring it back to the state governments and then back to the local governments and then finally back to the people where it belongs. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. If anybody has any questions.
I do have a question.
Oh no. Oh no.
So, it might be putting you on the spot a little bit.
Of course you
but,
are.
And I would like to give Mark another round of applause for getting us in front of the Republican caucus this morning. That never, ever happens across this country. I think, Monica, you said maybe 3 times. Has the Convention of States ever gotten in front of the caucus directly? So even though it was the last minute, I thought it was probably better because we didn't have enough time to get nervous about what we were doing. We just did it, and so I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
Yourself out to do that, but we had a question that came from one of the delegates this morning about how can you keep this from being a partisan effort. So if there is one representative coming from each state, how can we assure a delegate that it won't be taken over by Democrats or it won't be taken over by Republicans? I don't know if you have the answer to that, but I'm interested to see what you would have said if you were in my place.
I would say that your COS, Convention of States, is focused and limited to the following discussion. Term limits, stopping the unsustainable spending, and third, the administrative state. Stopping the expansion of the administrative state and just basically prohibiting it. So if you talk about that, on the spending, you might lose somebody who is a registered Democrat. On the administrative state, you might lose someone who is really interested in climate change because they like the administrative state to basically, govern your light bulbs and tell you what kind of electricity you can buy. Or whether you can put whether you are mandated to put solar panels on your rooftop, so that might offend them. And then, of course, lastly is what was the last bullet point?
Term limits.
Oh, yeah, well, term limits. Generally speaking, you would think that everybody would agree with that. It seems pretty straightforward. So, what you need to do is to steer the conversation to those 3 issues and say, look, the reason why we have $23 trillion in debt is because Republicans and Democrats, you should say both when you're talking to both sides, have been engaged in this unsustainable spending, which has resulted in the current state of affairs. And term limits, people would do, in theory, the right thing if you were term limited out. You would do the right thing. So I'll give you guys some insider baseball, right? Here's some insider baseball for Annapolis. So it stays in this room. Stays in this room. So Baltimore